Good morning, everyone. Good morning. You folks trickling in from the waiting room. We'll give it just a second for everyone's audio to catch up with us. We are so glad that you're here. And we are really glad to bring some fantastic local Franklin County leadership talent to the table today. I think the waiting room is looking good, so I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. Good morning and welcome. My colleague Brittany Bolton, who you normally see greet you on Thursday morning, she's on the road with my other colleague Melissa. They're on their way to a presentation. So I am filling in today and would love to start with just a couple quick updates. At the state level, the next House and Senate sessions are not scheduled until Wednesday, May 13th. So that's after that May 5th primary election. And while the State House is kind of quiet right now as far as session and committee hearings go, today at the State House, if you're interested in this, Senator Blessing and Senator Liston will be holding a press conference. They'll be joined also by Representative Matthews in the Ohio House, and they're going to be addressing paid family leave at that press conference. So Senators Blessing and Liston have recently released Senate Bill 396 that would establish family and medical leave insurance benefits. And so during that press conference today, they will be talking about this issue, elevating this issue, and also sharing a little bit more about their legislation. And so that's the state level as far as how things sit right now. And at the federal level, Congress is in session this week and next week, and then out again for another recess. And there was some activity last night, so just putting this on your radar, but we are now a little more than 2 months into the Department of Homeland Security DHS shutdown. And the US Senate held session last night, known as a vote-a-rama, official term, that stretched into the early hours of this morning. So that vote, supported by Senate Republicans, adopted a budget resolution with a plan to fund immigration agencies. So the budget reconciliation process is pretty complicated. The next step in a long series of steps, the next step would be for the US House to pass the same funding measure for it to move forward. So again, nothing is set in stone, but that did happen just early this morning. So something to keep your eye on if that's something on your radar. And next, I will briefly introduce our guest today, Director Danielle Tong. Director Tong is a seasoned leader and systems thinker with expertise in public health, philanthropy, and government. She leads CelebrateOne, a hybrid governmental multi-sector coalition charged with the mission to reduce Franklin County's infant mortality rate and advance health equity. Her leadership is rooted in using data to inform collaboration and community engagement, ensuring that strategies reflect the reality of lived experiences and deliver measurable results. We are so thrilled to have her here today. I know that you all are into it for a treat, so I'll turn it over to you, Director Tong. Take it away.
Thank you so much. And I will beg a little patience while I share my screen so that we can get started. Make sure I share the right screen. And all right, can somebody make sure that you can see my slides?
It looks great.
All right. So my name is Danielle Tong, and I'm the executive director for CelebrateOne. CelebrateOne, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but we are charged with the responsibility to reduce the infant mortality rate in the Franklin County area. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about getting to those root causes, what that means for us to get to root causes, and how we can more effectively do that. I'll start out with level setting us on what is infant mortality. Infant mortality is the death of a baby before they celebrate their first birthday. And it truly is a really stark indicator of a community's own well-being. So we can ask ourselves, how are we doing? And we can answer that by looking at the infant mortality rate. It's expressed as a rate, which you'll generally hear as just a single number. But what that number means is the number of deaths per every 1,000 live births in a community. And that rate exists just to make sure that we are able to compare ourselves to other regions so that we know how we're doing. If you ask a public health person, they will tell you that the leading causes of infant death are prematurity, low birth weight, congenital anomalies, and sleep-related deaths. And those are all true. But the question that lingers is why? Why do those things happen? And what do we know about how to prevent those things? CelebrateOne is a collective impact. We were established in 2014 by our mayor, Mayor Ginther, in his first administration. And we were established with this model, with this understanding that it takes many of us to do this job. But a collective impact has a very specific model, a very specific definition. There are 5 pillars. There is the common agenda, a shared measurement system, mutually reinforcing activities, continuous communication, and backbone support. And so all of those things together create the synergy required to get to the bottom of big problems like this. And we know that the foundation for a successful collective impact is really that common agenda and that shared measurement system that helps drive good decision making. So I'm going to share a little bit of data. And before I get to that, I'd like to share this disclaimer that all data that I'm sharing about 2025 are preliminary and will continue to change as we learn more from the state of Ohio on what happened in 2025. But it does take some time for our colleagues at the state to kind of process the data from that year. All right, so here's a chart with a lot of lines on it, and I'm gonna do my best to break this down for us. It's a line graph. It gives us the infant mortality rate between the years of 2012 and 2025. The colors are divided out by different races. So the orange that you see there is our non-Hispanic white rate, and the blue that's in the middle is our overall rate. And then the green is the non-Hispanic Black rate. And so the first thing that really hits you in the face is the very clear racial disparity that makes up infant mortality. But what you also see here is that there is an indication of decline in the overall rate. So as I shared before, we started this work in 2014. And between the years of 2016 and 2020, we saw a decline. However, in that year of 2021, we saw a tremendous spike. And that tremendous spike was being driven in that racial disparity. So you can see how that green bubble jumps up to 15.2. We saw that in a lot of other chronic health conditions, and the pandemic was all about how COVID was disproportionately affecting Black folks versus white folks. So we see that playing out in the infant mortality rate here, and that the line is continuing to go down from there. But that persistent disparity remains. That is consistent through all of the time that we've done this work, and it remains true. So here in 2025, you see that we are at an overall 5.9, which is a community low for us, but we still see that persistent racial disparity that indicates that our work is very far from done. This should leave you with a lot of questions around why this racial disparity is happening. Why does infant mortality continue to be an issue? What are the things that we should be doing about this? What is actually driving that rate, and how do we know? And these questions are pretty difficult to answer with the data that we currently have available. Infant mortality is made up of a lot of systems, and all of those systems ideally would need to interact with one another in order to be able to give us those root causes. But what we know right now is that the systems do not necessarily interact. They don't necessarily even track pregnancy status. So that doesn't tell us how our pregnant folks and families are experiencing the systems. And they are often siloed. So what that leaves us with is that we can say what is happening. That's that last slide you just saw there. But our data doesn't allow us to fully understand why it's happening. So what you're looking at here is all of the different types of systems that families interact with. This was taken from an effort here in Franklin County called the Community Information Exchange, which is an effort to pull systems together and streamline a point of entry for families. But it is also an opportunity for rich data collection. It's currently still being built. And the thing that I want to say here is that it is important for folks like us to be intentional about what we're putting into any system that we build together, to make sure that what we get out tells us the story of families and what their experiences are. If these systems are not talking with one another, it really leaves us with incomplete answers. So how are we getting to the bottom of this? CelebrateOne is working on building a shared measurement system. So I'll recall to your memory the pillars of collective impact and this very important piece called the shared measurement. We are building a shared measurement system that helps us better understand the why. Why is this happening? Because one thing we know is that the what, focusing on the what, will keep us in a reactive state, whereas focusing on the why allows us to be proactive. So a shared measurement system is a collection of countywide shared metrics, along with a metric inventory that tells us what is the universe of information available to us that allows us to align across partners. It allows us to engage with and link with statewide infrastructure and understand a deeper reasoning behind what is happening in our systems. All right, so I'm going to try to give you an indication of what we have now and how we endeavor to move forward. And this is a little chart that tells us what is the thing that we're trying to change. That is our infant mortality rate. And we talked about those leading causes earlier in the presentation that you'll often hear folks say. And I used an example here of preterm birth rate. So we have this data. These are available through the state. It is much of what this is, what I showed you in that line graph. That is also not prepared and finalized for us, but that is what we're working with around our infant mortality rate, around our preterm birth rate. Where we need to start being able to act is in our secondary causes area. So if we know that preterm birth is driving infant mortality, what is driving preterm birth and how are we performing? It's important to know those answers because that tells us what levers we need to pull and what we then need to do about it. So you see this big sort of explosion in the middle of the screen that says, hey, we don't have data that tell us about those secondary causes. So we immediately jump to what do we do without being sure that what we are choosing to do, the things that we're choosing to partake in are really going to make changes for us here locally. It doesn't allow us to get to a root cause analysis. So here's where we are starting. Our infant mortality data and our leading cause data we are getting from Vital Statistics. Thank you very much to our state department Department of Health for helping us with that. We don't have a unified place where we can look at these secondary causes, but that doesn't mean the data are not available. It means that it exists in those disparate systems that we saw that were around that circle, and that those organizations likely are collecting the information that we need in order to get to that. In the what we do category is really about how are we making decisions out of the secondary causes around what actions we need to be taking. So our process here in Franklin County is this. The development of a countywide set of measures, which really consists of just one question upon intake at our many partners. Is someone in the home pregnant? Full stop. That allows us to take that information along with any other information that any organization is collecting and cross-tab it to better understand what is happening for families there. So I will take the example of a food pantry, which I'm hoping many regions on the call have. If a food pantry is able to ascertain whether pregnant people are in the homes of the families that they're serving, it can also allow us to then say, well, what are the experience of pregnant people using the pantry through the other data that they are already collecting? So that takes us through step one. Step two is really about then what is that other data? What is the universe of possibility in our region as far as what we can learn about families? What are our legal aid organizations collecting? What are our food pantries collecting? Our housing organizations collecting? And how can we then cross tabulate that with who is pregnant to understand how pregnant people are then experiencing those systems? It is not enough to have a giant dictionary of measures, though. We then have to narrow that dictionary down to the ones that we know directly connect to our outcome measures, which is infant mortality, ultimately prematurity, low birth weight, etc. And we narrow that down to maybe 20% of that inventory. And we say those are the ones we have to have our finger to the pulse of on a regular iterative basis. The next step is really about building in that infrastructure. For Franklin County, that really does mean that we have access to the Community Information Exchange. For folks around the state, that could mean that you're using the Ohio Supercomputer Center, which is a thing. I promise I didn't make it up. If you look all the way to the far right-hand side of this slide, this tells you what types of things the Supercomputer Center really is able to help you do. But ultimately, this is about where do we store the information that we are able to collect. And then step 4 is about how do we use it. So I want to highlight that even if we got rid of step 3, we would have the buddings of a very useful data infrastructure, even if it were somewhat manual. But getting us through step 3 allows it to be easier to pull. And getting us through step 4 is about the data literacy of our community to be able to use that information. For us, this timeline looks a little bit like this. We are working through the standard and postpartum metric set right now. And alongside that, building out that metrics inventory. From there, we'll be developing baseline metrics and validating those measures. And all along this time, we will be looking at technological integration, continuous improvement, and learning. And all of this adds up to our field looking a little bit like NASA. When I had this in mind, I really didn't expect for us to have the Artemis shuttle liftoff, but it feels really meaningful right now for us to be able to say that if we are able to invest in things like getting our folks off the planet and to the farthest reaches that we have experienced for humankind, we can absolutely do this. We can absolutely get to a predictive state around infant maternal health. So what can you do here on the phone? It's really, or on the call today, it's really about asking deeper questions, not just saying, oh, jumping directly, oh, to what do we do about it? We need to ask questions about, but why is this happening? And who is this happening to? And what are the mechanisms that are driving it? We need to worry about establishing and strengthening those cross-sector partnerships to get rid of those silos. And join us as we go down this learning path of building a shared measurement system. But ultimately, never stop asking why. Why does this happen? Without this answer, we will always be reacting as opposed to being able to be proactive. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm excited about any questions that we have today. I can stop sharing.
Thank you so much. That's so much information to put into a short presentation, and you did it so well. Thank you for elevating this important work. So yes, this is a great time for anyone. If you'd like to pop off mute, please feel free. Also feel free to utilize the chat function. But while we have Director Tong's expertise with us today, if there are questions you have for her, please feel free to share them. To get us started, while some folks might be thinking, I wonder, I saw your slide where you showed some of the things that you do in the community. I know that so much of your work is really community rooted and based in building relationships with families. And so just wondering if you have insights to share about building trust with the community.
So I want to say that I think that we are all learning together around building trust. So I don't necessarily propose to have all of the answers, but the way that we are working to address trust issues, I think it's especially pertinent because CelebrateOne is seated within our local government, which can sometimes be seen as very distant and separate from the community. The way that we are working on this is twofold. It's first that we have a staff member that is fully dedicated to her whole job is to get to know our communities, the people who live there. It is to never to be at her desk, but it is to be building relationship with neighbors. And we were really intentional about who we selected for that role. She already has strong relationships in our community coming from the library. But the second piece to that was then to invite community to be in spaces with us. And so we have tentatively called those folks community champions, but we're hoping that they will find a name they like better, that will help us understand their communities, their experiences, and where we should be plugging in so that we don't have to make guesses around what each of our neighborhoods need. In Franklin County, we use a place-based approach, which means that we are targeting very specifically zip codes that have the highest infant mortality rates in Franklin County. But each of those communities have very different personalities from one another. And so it's important for us to make sure that we are being led and guided by the people who live there.
Thank you so much. And I see some love in the chat too that that we can do this, the technological advances that you mentioned. But you know, it requires that we make this issue a priority to really see progress. So some appreciation for your work there. Thank you, Renee, for
Thank you.
sharing that in the chat.
I really can't overstate this enough. You know, when we endeavored on saying that this was the work of CelebrateOne in the era that we're in, we started by learning from organizations that are farther down the path of shared measurement. So they might not be in infant maternal health, but they are doing shared measurement well. And the one thing I can tell you is that it is not necessarily super dependent on the technology when you think about, oh, cloud computing and oh, this, all those things make it easier. But all of the orgs that we talked to were at different technological phases, and we're still able to drive data-driven results by the simple fact that they had access to the data. And that is really where I see a lot of opportunity for our region and even our state, is in that we have this well of great talent and big hearts working on this in all these different capacities. We just need to tap the well. And that's what CelebrateOne is working to do.
When you, that just sparked a question in my mind. Are you, is the technology that we have greater access to now, is that helping to provide more real-time data so there are fewer lags?
I haven't seen that technology has yet married up to our existing data set to reduce lags. We are very dependent upon data that come from our Ohio Department of Health. And there are some very clear constraints in how they process that data because it comes from across the state and because they have to negotiate the number of people in that data set to make sure that it is not identifiable. There are a lot of constraints. And so I think while our data analysis catches up to the technological advances we've made everywhere else, it really is dependent upon localities to tap their own local resources. And that's really what we are working to do. And that is what our community partners that we've seen that made advancements in this space have been successful with.
I just wanted to highlight that my response about the technology wasn't really related to the technology. It's related to the investment of our government, and we can spend cajillions of dollars to do space adventures, and we are not prioritizing the humans. And so your work serves to put a capital letter, on what's going on and highlight it so that, I mean, I think we all know that sometimes just shaming your government into saying, we're spending our money over here, but you could solve this problem with just this much money. But somebody has to highlight that for that to be an effective tool. And so just thank you so much for being that constant beat of the drum that says not only is this an issue, but this is fixable. And it wouldn't cost us too much money to do so.
I think that if you want to come to every presentation I do on this, I would welcome it, because I think you summarized it well. I don't want to be necessarily shaming our government. However, I would be happily providing that contrast between where we are currently making investments and where we could certainly stand to make further investments. I also like to highlight that, as you said, we are not asking for $1 million trillion here. We are an organization that is looking to do this work over 2 years in less than $300,000, which sounds like a lot, but that is us getting this off the ground. That is the initial cost, and that is very doable when you think about all of the other things that we're able to accomplish. The one thing I think that we will have to all commit to in advancing this work over time is around how we bring our neighbors, our community members, our practitioners along in the data literacy piece and in the governance and structure and how it's used. So even investments in capacity building around how to learn about this data collection process and how to grow in analysis will be incredibly important as well.
Great feedback, Lene. Thank you so much for that and for your participation today.
I was just joking about the shame. Honestly, I was, but I am totally on the same page with you, Lene, that somebody has to say the thing out loud. And so that is what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that that's the translation, that we aren't able to, as a government, just do the right thing. Sometimes it's highlighting the fact that we are choosing priorities that don't match with human life and human well-being. So yeah, you're doing a great job, and you're a consummate professional.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So hopefully if anybody has more questions about how we're doing this, or if you just want to learn alongside us, because we are very much learning as well, please feel free to reach out to me. I love this topic. I could talk about it all day, and I'm happy to share.
Director Tong, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you all for your participation, your engagement. Really appreciate everyone's time, and really greatly appreciate the work of CelebrateOne. It is 10 o'clock on the nose, so I am going to wish everyone a wonderful Thursday, and we hope to see you next week. Thank you again. Take good care, everyone.
Bye. Great job. Groundwork Ohio.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here this morning. It's good to see you as always. I'm sure we'll catch up again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Bye. Bye.